Part 1, Chapter 1 of The Job. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. The Job by Sinclair Lewis. Part 1, The City. Chapter 1. Captain Lew Golden would have saved any foreign observer a great deal of trouble in studying America. He was an almost perfect type of the petty, small-town, middle-class lawyer. He lived in Panama, Pennsylvania. He had never been captain of anything except the Crescent Volunteer Fire Company, but he owned the title because he collected rents, wrote insurance, and meddled with lawsuits. He carried a quite visible mustache comb, and wore a collar but no tie. On warm days he appeared on the street in his shirt sleeves, and discussed the comparative temperatures of the past 30 years with Dr. Smith and the Mansion House bus driver. He never used the word beauty, except in reference to a setter dog. Beauty of words or music, of faith or rebellion, did not exist for him. He rather fancied large, ambitious, banal, red and gold sunsets, but he merely glanced at them as he straggled home, and remarked that they were nice. He believed that all Parisians, artists, millionaires, and socialists were immoral. His entire system of theology was comprised in the Bible, which he never read, and the Methodist Church, which he rarely attended, and he desired no system of economics beyond the current platform of the Republican Party. He was aimlessly industrious, crotchety but kind, and almost quixotically honest. He believed that Panama, Pennsylvania was good enough for anybody. This last opinion was not shared by his wife, nor by his daughter Una. Mrs. Golden was one of the women who aspire just enough to be vaguely discontented, not enough to make them toil at the acquisition of understanding and knowledge. She had floated into a comfortable semi-belief in a semi-Christian Science, and she read novels with a conviction that she would have been a romantic person if she hadn't married Mr. Golden, not but what he's a fine man and very bright and all, but he hasn't got much imagination or any, well, romance. She wrote poetry about spring and neighborhood births, and Captain Golden admired it so actively that he read it aloud to callers. She attended all the meetings of the Panama Study Club, and desired to learn French, though she never went beyond borrowing a French grammar from the Episcopalian rector and learning one conjugation. But in the pioneer suffrage movement she took no part. She didn't think it was quite ladylike. She was a poor cook, and her house always smelled stuffy, but she liked to have flowers about. She was pretty of face, frail of body, genuinely gracious of manner. She really did like people, liked to give cookies to the neighborhood boys, and, if you weren't impatient with her slackness, you found her a wistful and touching figure in her slight youthfulness and in the ambition to be a romantic personage, a Marie Antoinette or a Mrs. Grover Cleveland, which ambition she still retained at 55. She was, in appearance, the ideal wife and mother, sympathetic, forgiving, bright-lipped as a May morning. She never demanded, she merely suggested her desires, and, if they were refused, let her lips droop in a manner which only a brute could withstand. She plaintively admired her efficient daughter Una. Una Golden was a good little woman, not pretty, not noisy, not particularly articulate, but instinctively on the inside of things, naturally able to size up people and affairs. She had common sense and unkindled passion. She was a matter-of-fact idealist, with a healthy woman's simple longing for love and life. At 24, Una had half a dozen times fancied herself in love. She had been embraced at a dance, and felt the stirring of a desire for surrender. But always a native shrewdness had kept her from agonizing over these affairs. She was not, and will not be, a misunderstood genius, an undeveloped artist, an embryonic leader in feminism, nor an ugly duckling who would put on a Georgette hat and captivate the theatrical world. She was an untrained, ambitious, thoroughly commonplace small-town girl. But she was a natural executive, and she secretly controlled the Golden household, kept Captain Golden from eating with his knife, and her mother from becoming drugged with too much reading of poppy-flavored novels. She wanted to learn anything. But the Goldens were too respectable to permit her to have a job, and too poor to permit her to go to college. From the age of 17, when she had graduated from the high school, in white ribbons and heavy new boots and tight new organdie, to 23, she had kept house and gone to gossip parties and unmethodically read books from the town library, Walter Scott, Richard Le Gallienne, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Mrs. Humphrey Ward, How to Know the Birds, My Year in the Holy Land, Home Needlework, Sartor Resartus, and Ships That Pass in the Night. Her residue of knowledge from reading them was a disbelief in Panama, Pennsylvania. She was likely never to be anything more amazing than a mother and wife, who would entertain the Honiton Embroidery Circle twice a year. Yet potentially Una Golden was as glowing as any princess of balladry. She was waiting for the fairy prince, though he seemed likely to be nothing more decorative than a salesman in a brown derby. She was fluid, indeterminate as a moving cloud. Although Una Golden had neither piquant prettiness nor grave handsomeness, her soft littleness made people call her Puss, and want to cuddle her as a child cuddles a kitten. If you noted Una at all when you met her, you first noted her gentle face, her fine-textured hair of faded gold, and her rimless eyeglasses with a gold chain over her ear. These glasses made a business-like center to her face. You felt that without them she would have been too childish. Her mouth was as kind as her spirited eyes, but it drooped. Her body was so femininely soft that you regarded her as rather plump. But for all her curving hips and the thick ankles which she considered common, she was rather anemic. Her cheeks were round, not rosy, but clear and soft, her lips a pale pink. Her chin was plucky and undimpled. It was usually spotted with one or two unimportant eruptions, which she kept so well covered with powder that they were never noticeable. No one ever thought of them except Una herself, to whom they were tragic blemishes which she timorously examined in the mirror every time she went to wash her hands. She knew that they were the result of the indigestible Golden family meals. She tried to take comfort by noticing their prevalence among other girls, but they kept startling her anew. She would secretly touch them with a worried forefinger, and wonder whether men were able to see anything else in her face. You remembered her best as she hurried through the street in her tan mackintosh with its yellow velveteen collar turned high up, and one of those modest round hats to which she was addicted. For then you were aware only of the pale gold hair fluffing round her schoolmistress eyeglasses, her gentle air of respectability, and her undistinguished littleness. She trusted in the village ideal of virginal vacuousness as the type of beauty which most captivated men, though every year she was more shrewdly doubtful of the divine superiority of these men. That a woman's business in life was to remain respectable and to secure a man, and consequent security, was her unmeditated faith, till, in 1905, when Una was 24 years old, her father died. Captain Golden left to wife and daughter a good name, a number of debts, and $1,100 in lodge insurance. The funeral was scarcely over before neighbors, the furniture man, the grocer, the polite old homeopathic doctor, began to come in with bland sympathy and large bills. When the debts were all cleared away, the Goldens had only $600 and no income beyond the good name. All right-minded persons agree that a good name is precious beyond rubies, but Una would have preferred less honor and more rubies. She was so engaged in comforting her mother that she scarcely grieved for her father. She took charge of everything, money, house, bills. Mrs. Golden had been overwhelmed by a realization that, however slack and shallow Captain Golden had been, he had adored her and encouraged her in her gentility, her pawing at culture. With an emerging sincerity, Mrs. Golden mourned him, now, missed his gossipy presence, and at the same time she was alive to the distinction it added to her slim gracefulness to wear black and look wan. She sobbed on Una's shoulder. She said that she was lonely, and Una sturdily comforted her, and looked for work. One of the most familiar human combinations in the world is that of unemployed daughter and widowed mother. 1,000 times you have seen the jobless daughter devoting all of her curiosity, all of her youth, to a widowed mother of small pleasantries, a small income, and a shabby security. 30 comes, and 35. The daughter ages steadily. At 40 she is as old as her unwithering mother. Sweet she is, and pathetically hopeful of being a pianist or a nurse, never quite reconciled to spinsterhood, though she often laughs about it. Often, by her insistence that she is an old maid, she makes the thought of her barren age embarrassing to others. The mother is sweet, too, and wants to keep in touch with her daughter's interests, only her daughter has no interests. Had the daughter revolted at 18, had she stubbornly insisted that mother either accompany her to parties or be content to stay alone, had she acquired interests, she might have meant something in the new generation. But the time for revolt passes, however much the daughter may long to seem young among younger women. The mother is usually unconscious of her selfishness. She would be unspeakably horrified if some brutal soul told her that she was a vampire. Chance and waste, rule them both, and the world passes by while the mother has her games of cards with daughter, and deems herself unselfish because now and then she lets daughter join a party, only to hasten back to mother, and even wonders why daughter doesn't take an interest in girls her own age. That ugly couple on the porch of the apple sauce and wash pitcher boarding house, the mother a mute, dwarfish punchinello, and the daughter a drab woman of 40 with a mole, a wart, a silence. that charming mother of white hair and real lace with the well-groomed daughter, that comfortable mother at home and daughter in an office, but with no suitors, no ambition beyond the one at home. They are all examples of the mother and daughter phenomenon, that most touching, most destructive example of selfless unselfishness, which robs all the generations to come, because mother has never been trained to endure the long, long thoughts of solitude, because she sees nothing by herself, and within herself hears no diverting voice. There were many such mothers and daughters in Panama. If they were wealthy, daughter collected rents and saw lawyers and belonged to a club and tried to keep youthful at parties. If middle class, daughter taught school almost invariably. If poor, mother did the washing and daughter collected it. So it was marked down for Una that she should be a teacher. Not that she wanted to be a teacher. After graduating from high school, she had spent 2 miserable terms of teaching in the small white district school, 4 miles out on the Bethlehem road. She hated the drive out and back, the airless room and the foul outbuildings, the shy, stupid, staring children, the jolly little arithmetical problems about wallpaper, piles of lumber, the amount of time that notoriously inefficient workmen will take to do a certain piece of work. Una was honest enough to know that she was not an honest teacher, that she neither loved masses of other people's children, nor had any ideals of developing the new generation. But she had to make money. Of course she would teach. When she talked over affairs with her tearful mother, Mrs. Golden always ended by suggesting, "I wonder if perhaps you couldn't go back to school teaching again. Everybody said you were so successful, and maybe I could get some needlework to do. I do want to help so much." Mrs. Golden did apparently really want to help, but she never suggested anything besides teaching, and she went on recklessly investing in the nicest mourning. Meantime Una tried to find other work in Panama. Seen from a balloon, Panama is merely a mole on the long hill slopes. But to Una its few straggly streets were a whole cosmos. She knew somebody in every single house. She knew just where the succotash, the cake boxes, the clotheslines were kept in each of the grocery stores. And on market Saturdays she could wait on herself. She summed up the whole town and its possibilities, and she wondered what opportunities the world out beyond Panama had for her. She recalled 2 trips to Philadelphia and 1 to Harrisburg. She made out a list of openings with such methodical exactness as she devoted to keeping the dwindling lodge insurance from disappearing altogether. Hers was no poetic outreach, like that of the young genius who wants to be off for Bohemia. It was a question of earning money in the least tedious way. Una was facing the feminist problem, without knowing what the word feminist meant. This was her list of fair fields of fruitful labor. She could, and probably would, teach in some hen coop of pedagogy. She could marry, but no one seemed to want her except old Henry Carson, the widower, with catarrh and 3 children, who called on her and her mother once in 2 weeks, and would propose whenever she encouraged him to. This she knew scientifically. She had only to sit beside him on the sofa, let her hand drop down beside his. But she positively and ungratefully didn't want to marry Henry and listen to his hawking and his grumbling for the rest of her life. Sooner or later one of "the boys" might propose. But in a small town it was all a gamble. There weren't so very many desirable young men; most of the energetic ones went off to Philadelphia and New York. True that Jenny McTevish had been married at 31, when everybody had thought she was hopelessly an old maid; yet here was Bertie Mayberry unmarried at 34. No one could ever understand why, for she had been the prettiest and jolliest girl in town. Una crossed blessed matrimony off the list as a commercial prospect. She could go off and study music, law, medicine, elocution, or any of that amazing hodgepodge of pursuits which are permitted to small town women. But she really couldn't afford to do any of these; and besides, she had no talent for music of a higher grade than Sousa and Victor Herbert. She was afraid of lawyers; blood made her sick; and her voice was too quiet for the noble art of elocution, as practised by several satin-waisted, semi-artistic ladies who "gave readings" of Enoch Arden and Evangeline before the Panama Study Circle and the Panama Annual Chautauqua. She could have a job selling dry goods behind the counter in the Hub store, but that meant loss of caste. She could teach dancing, but she couldn't dance particularly well, and that was all that she could do. She had tried to find work as office woman for Dr. Mayberry, the dentist, in the office of the Panama Wood Turning Company, in the post office, as lofty enthroned cashier for the Hub store, painting place cards and making fancy work for the Art Needlework Exchange. The job behind the counter in the Hub store was the only one offered her. "If I were only a boy," sighed Una. "I could go to work in the hardware store or on the railroad or anywhere, and not lose respectability. Oh, I hate being a woman." Una had been trying to persuade her father's old-time rival, Squire Updegraff, the real estate and insurance man, that her experience with Captain Golden would make her a perfect treasure in the office. Squire Updegraff had leaped up at her entrance and blared, "Well, well, and how is the little girl making it?" He had set out a chair for her and held her hand; but he knew that her only experience with her father's affairs had been an effort to balance Captain Golden's account books, which were works of genius in so far as they were composed according to the inspirational method. So there was nothing very serious in their elaborate discussion of giving Una a job. It was her last hope in Panama. She went disconsolately down the short street, between the two-story buildings and the rows of hitched lumber wagons. Nellie Page, the town belle, tripping by in canvas sneakers and a large red hair ribbon, shouted at her, and Charlie Martindale, of the First National Bank, nodded to her; but these exquisites were too young for her; they danced too well and laughed too easily. The person who stopped her for a long curbstone conference about the weather, while most of the town observed and gossiped, was the fateful Henry Carson. The village sun was unusually blank and hard on Henry's bald spot to day. Heavens! She cried to herself, in almost hysterical protest. Would she have to marry Henry? Miss Mattie Pugh drove by, returning from district school. Miss Mattie had taught at Clark's Crossing for 17 years, had grown meek and meager and hopeless. Heavens! thought Una, Would she have to be shut into the fetid barn of a small school unless she married Henry? "I won't be genteel. I'll work in the Hub or any place first," Una declared. While she trudged home, a pleasant, inconspicuous, fluffy-haired young woman, undramatic as a field daisy, a cataract of protest poured through her. All the rest of her life she would have to meet that doddering old Mr. Mosley, who was unavoidably bearing down on her now, and be held by him in long, meaningless talks. And there was nothing amusing to do. She was so frightfully bored. She suddenly hated the town, hated every evening she would have to spend there, reading newspapers and playing cards with her mother, and dreading a call from Mr. Henry Carson. She wanted some one to love, to talk with. Why had she discouraged the beautiful Charlie Martindale, the time he had tried to kiss her at a dance? Charlie was fatuous, but he was young, and she wanted yes, that was it, she wanted youth, she who was herself so young. And she would grow old here unless one of these godlike young men, condescended to recognize her. Grow old among these streets like piles of lumber. She charged into the small, white, ambling, golden house, with its peculiar smell of stale lamb gravy, and on the old broken couch, where her father had snored all through every bright Sunday afternoon, she sobbed feebly. She raised her head to consider a noise overhead, the faint, domestic thunder of a sewing machine shaking the walls with its rhythm. The machine stopped. She heard the noise of scissors dropped on the floor, the most stuffily domestic sound in the world. The airless house was crushing her. She sprang up, and then she sat down again. There was no place to which she could flee. Henry Carson and the district school were menacing her. And meantime she had to find out what her mother was sewing, whether she had again been wasting money in buying mourning. "Poor, poor little mother, working away happy up there, and I've got to go and scold you," Una agonized. "Oh, I want to earn money. I want to earn real money for you." She saw a quadrangle of white on the table, behind a book. She pounced on it. It was a letter from Mrs. Sessions, and Una scratched it open excitedly. Mr. and Mrs. Albert Sessions, of Panama, had gone to New York. Mr. Sessions was in machinery. They liked New York. They lived in a flat, and went to theaters. Mrs. Sessions was a pillowy soul whom Una trusted. "Why don't you," wrote Mrs. Sessions, "if you don't find the kind of work you want in Panama, think about coming up to New York and taking stenography? There are lots of chances here for secretaries, etc." Una carefully laid down the letter. She went over and straightened her mother's red wool slippers. She wanted to postpone for an exquisite throbbing moment the joy of announcing to herself that she had made a decision. She would go to New York, become a stenographer, a secretary to a corporation president, a rich woman, free, responsible. The fact of making this revolutionary decision so quickly gave her a feeling of power, of already being a businesswoman. She galloped upstairs to the room where her mother was driving the sewing machine. "Mumsy," she cried, "we're going to New York. I'm going to learn to be a business woman, and the little mother will be all dressed in satin and silks, and dine on what is it and peaches and cream. The poem don't come out right, but oh, my little mother, we're going out adventuring, we are!" She plunged down beside her mother, burrowed her head in her mother's lap, kissed that hand whose skin was like thinnest wrinkly tissue paper. "Why, my little daughter, what is it? Has some one sent for us? Is it the letter from Emma Sessions? What did she say in it?" "She suggested it, but we are going up independent." "But can we afford to? I would like the dramas and art galleries and all." "We will afford to. We'll gamble for once." End of chapter 1.